Good morning from Paris and welcome to my very first podcast. Today we're talking about food and art with two wonderful people, Charlotte Skene Catling, award-winning architect, and Adam Lowe, founder of Factum Arte, a company with its headquarters in Madrid that seeks to construct a bridge between new technologies and art. We've been all living through strange times this year. And I guess one thing we all had in common, or most of us had in common, was cooking. You mentioned that you spent your lockdown in Madrid and you started researching Velázquez's work, his life in Seville, and how he portrayed food in his early works, bodegones.
Well, Leslie, if I kick this one off for us, I mean, it's true. Charlotte and I
Yeah,
spent all of lockdown in Madrid, which was lovely to have a chance to be in one place and not to travel and to think and to talk. And one of the things we were talking about was the Casa Natal de Velázquez. So this is a big project that we're working on together.
yeah,
We're working on with a group of people from Sevilla, Enrique Negra, Enrique Pinheiro, and Eduardo Catalan, who bought the house in which Velázquez was born.
yeah,
And rather miraculously, Velázquez wasn't born to a rich family. He was born to a relatively modest family. But the house is still in good condition. So it's more or less unchanged. I mean, good condition would be wrong. I mean, it's
yeah.
fallen down, but it hasn't been pulled down, and it's still there. And
No, it's amazing. I mean, it was lived in for until quite recently by families. So as it would have been when Velázquez was there and living there, and then it became a contemporary art gallery briefly, and then a house for a fashion company. And so that combined managed to preserve this building almost completely intact. But the thing that's very strange, I find, walking into the building is that you have to go down several steps because the city has completely grown up around it. You know, the levels
Yeah.
of the street have raised since the 16th century when it was built.
So it's been really special times for all of us, and maybe something everybody had in common. We were all cooking a lot at home.
Yes, yeah.
Instead, you started researching about food in Velázquez's work and how he portrayed it.
At the end of last year, we had this great opportunity
Yeah,
to work on one of the amazing paintings by Velázquez called The Old Woman Cooking Eggs. So
yeah,
part of the idea of the Casa Natal de Velázquez is it's going to be a new type of museum. So it won't actually have original objects. It might have some original pieces of furniture, but more or less, we're going to recreate the environment that allows you to understand what it was like to live in Seville in the first 25 years of the 1600s, so the beginning of the 17th century. And really the starting point was looking at this painting, The Old Woman Cooking Eggs, and starting to think about what it was like to live there at that time. So Velázquez was born in 1599, which was a plague year. So his grandparents died in the plague. It was the first of the Black Plagues to devastate the city. But the city was probably the richest city in the world. It was the gateway to the New World, to the whole of the South of America, or the Americas, that were flooding Europe with new things, from tobacco to maize to cotton to a whole lot of ingredients, from potatoes to tomatoes to chili peppers and peppers. And Charles and I will go on talking about this. But looking at this painting of an old lady cooking eggs on top of a simple fire with a sort of chimney and a ceramic bowl, and thinking that basically this is pretty similar to the cooking equipment of people in the New World, to the Aztecs and the Incas and the people who were living in Mexico and down south, or the pre-Columbian indigenous communities of the north, who basically are cooking in ceramic vessels over open fires, sometimes controlling the heat. And so Velázquez is one of those extraordinary painters of materials. So you look at the clay, you look at the ceramic, the simple vessels, and the ceramic bowl, and the channel, which is the stove that the old lady's cooking on. You look at the clothes they're wearing and the textures of the fabric, and then start thinking that all of these things were really made anew. So Charlotte and I, Charlotte more than me, I confess, started thinking about what were they eating.
It might be interesting too, to sort of bring out, I mean, don't get me wrong, we didn't cook all of these, but some of the recipes that also reflect how much the Arabian influence in Spain at that time. And there was a recipe book published in 1520 in Barcelona called the Libro de Cocina, the Book of Cooking. And it's fascinating. It's filled with these very strange recipes, a lot of them using cinnamon, cloves, rose water, pomegranates, quite a lot of sugar. And I could tell you a few of the recipes as we go through the podcast, because they're quite fascinating things.
Charlotte, just one second, because these are very exciting, because in 1520, 1492, Columbus crossed and discovered the New World. And he was trying to discover the East. So, he was trying to find the shortcut to the Moluccas. He was trying to get to the spices, because at that time, it was Venice that controlled all of the trade of the spices coming from the East. And so, exactly as Charlotte said, a lot of the cooking in Spain was very influenced by the Arab culture that had been here for more or less 700 years, until 1492, when Granada fell, and then there was the first expulsion of the Jews and the Muslims. And really, one of the things that shocked me a lot when we started talking about Velázquez, and it's worth remembering that Velázquez almost certainly was a converso. So his grandparents come in at the end of the 16th century from the south of Portugal with the name da Silva, which is almost certainly a Jewish family who are coming to live in Seville. I mean, Velázquez baptized. So to live there, you had to be a Christian. You have to remember the Inquisition was very, very strong at that time. And it was in 1608, when Velázquez was 9 years old, that there was then the expulsion of all of the conversos, so all of the Jewish community and the Islamic community that had converted to Christianity. So it's the second wave of political control that expelled. So, I mean, now we're in an era of rising political correctness and control, but then it was pretty absolute. And the extreme decisions that were made. I mean, imagine expelling people who've been there for 700 years, who then converted. Yeah. So I think what Charlotte started to notice was this mix of Jewish culinary traditions, Arabic culinary traditions, and Christian traditions, all colliding throughout the 16th century. And then in the 17th century, all of these new ingredients. So, I mean, I don't know, could I do a list? Charlotte, do you want to do?
Yes, please.
I'm just looking at some of the titles of these recipes, because I think they sort of draw a picture in the same way that Velázquez's paintings do, that make you intrigued and that also give you such an insight to human beings. You know, it's a real connection through food, which I know that you've discovered through your website and your travels around the world. But to give you a few titles, so here's one, an electuary, which is a sort of sauce of sour cherries for sick people who've lost their desire to eat. And they're quite developed, these recipes, you know, that, and here you can, I mean, you can cook from these. They're very, to eat figs in the French manner. And this is a rather delicious thing of figs, which are then roasted. Take dried figs, the sweetest that you can get, black and white, remove the stems and wash them with a good white wine, which is sweet. And then when they're very well cleaned, take an earthenware casserole, which is big enough, which is a flat bottom, and cast them inside, stirring them a little, and then put this casserole upon the coals and well covered in a manner that it is stewed there. And when they are stewed, and they will have absorbed all of the moisture of the wine, stir them a little and cast fine spice on top of them, and turn them, stirring in a manner that incorporates that spice in them, and then eat this food. And it is an elegant thing, and it should be eaten at the beginning of the meal. And you know, and so you have this whole thing, and then the spices they describe in a different part of the book. But it is.
It should be eaten at the beginning of the meal.
Yeah.
Eating your spicy figs cooked in wine at the beginning, because I also love. I mean, just to jump back a bit before Velázquez to the 9th century, one of the characters that I absolutely fell in love with when I moved to live in Spain was a man called Zeya, who was born at the end of the 8th century. So he was born in 789, and he dies in the middle of the 9th century. And Zeya was this amazing polymath. So the second theme I'd love Charlotte and I to be able to intertwine with cooking is this idea that everything links together. It's only really in a professional world where things were separated out and you weren't allowed to be a polymath. You had to be one thing or another. But Zeynep was an astronomer, a geographer, a botanist. He worked on designing and making cosmetics. He was obsessed with facial and bodily hair. So he ran depilation parlors. He loved the culinary arts. And that was one of his things. But really, he was a musician. I mean, his great thing was to build the first conservatoire and, of course, fashion. But one of Zeynep's great things was he specified the way we eat. So he ordered the courses of meals from this movement of sweet or savory, salty, into meat, and out the other side into desserts. He invented, or so they say, the tablecloth. And there's something about having a tablecloth which changes the nature of a table. It's as if it's being dressed and offered up. And with his friend Ibn Firnas, they invented the stalked wine glass because they loved the poetry of the shadows cast by red wine suspended on a transparent stalk being cast through the candles on the table onto a white tablecloth. And
it's such a beautiful idea, isn't it? I love it.
And so I think that, you know, it's often easy to think previous generations were somehow less sophisticated than we are. But the idea of people traipsing to McDonald's in the 21st century while Ibn Firnas and Zeynep were discussing the shadows cast by red wine through candlelight onto white tablecloths. I think it shows where priorities can alter. Charlotte, back to recipes.
Would you like another recipe?
Yes.
Yes, I'd love to. Please.
Okay, here is a thin sauce from the juice of sour pomegranates. Take a cup of the seeds of sour pomegranates and thoroughly extract the juice from them. And then take a roasted hen's liver and grind it well in a mortar with 8 egg yolks. And when all is well ground, strain it through a woolen cloth. And when it has been strained, put it in the pot or in an earthenware casserole. And take an ounce of cinnamon or cast in the spice according to the quantity which you desire to make. And let it be ground and blended with the said juice. And cast 4 ounces of sugar on it, and then set it on fire of coals and cook it until it begins to thicken. And this sauce is good for all fowls in place of a sauce for peacock, and it is made very quickly.
Did you try to make any of these recipes at
Some of
home.
these, we were making things with, we were using a lot of almonds, flour. We were cooking, of course, in the terracotta pots,
Yeah,
and roasting quite a lot of birds, quail.
But you were also doing things with chia seeds and quinoa, both two ingredients that came from the New World, that came from the south of America. I mean, the list of ingredients, obviously, cotton and tobacco
yeah,
fundamentally changed the world
Yeah, yeah.
in the 16th, and by the 17th century, they were there. So the main reason for the growth of one of the main reasons for the growth of the wealth of Seville was that they were taking a tax on everything coming in.
yeah.
So taxing tobacco was nothing new, and the Real Fábrica de Tobacco was set up in Seville in the very early 17th century. So while Velázquez was living there, and it was built in the vicinity of where he was born, near the heart of the city. The beautiful tobacco factory that's there now was actually built in the beginning of the 18th century, but at that time it was smaller. So the cotton, of course, I mean, woolen straining is not as efficient as doing it with cotton. And one of the first gifts to the Europeans when they arrived in Mexico was spun cotton. And this is something that's changed the way we dress, the way we function. But of course, maize was one of the endemic ingredients that came flooding in. Avocados, and one of my favorite discovery is the name avocado comes from the indigenous word for testicles. And when you look at an avocado, that's quite easy to understand.
The roast peppers with anchovies was rather good. They used quite a lot of fish that was preserved as a way of flavoring. Do you know, so that you have these quite umami tastes as they develop. Garlic and fennel combined, with oil and as a way to flavor meats was another one.
But I love the way, Charlotte, you were cooking the garlic by just putting them into the earthenware bowls and cutting the whole clove of garlic in half.
The whole head, yeah.
And the head of garlic, and the whole head of garlic, yeah. And it sort of becomes this weird sweetness and spiciness together. I mean, that was almost my favorite one, cooked with the sirloin of porks wrapped in bacon. And again, I mean, it should be remembered, but at that time, the way you proved people were true conversos is they were made to eat pork. Yeah. And so again, this idea of political...
And all and still now in Spain, all the sweet biscuits and pastries are made with lard, because that was a really sneaky way of trying to reveal people, who they really were. It seems quite diabolical, these tricks that are still locked into the culture of food of a country.
Yeah, it's fascinating how food how food is political.
Exactly.
And what we can eat and what we can't.
Exactly. Political, cultural, ceremonial, so many different layers to it. It's so embedded in culture and human beings. I mean, you have to eat to survive, but it's been taken to such an extreme beyond what's necessary for survival.
I think one of your questions was, is cooking an art form? And for me, I think when I first started to think about that, if you look at Velázquez paintings or the whole history of things that are designed not to change, that's one thing. But actually, ephemeral arts are incredibly important to the way we live. So intangible, I think calling it intangible heritage is wrong. I mean, you eat it, it's totally tangible, the most tangible thing you could have. And I think it was this sense of looking again at these paintings, thinking about food. Why does Velázquez continually paint domestic scenes? Why is he painting the old woman cooking eggs? Why is he painting the water cellar of Seville, which we recorded 2 weeks ago, which is an extraordinary painting? And again, I think it's worth asking not only why was he painting these things, but how? How did a 17, 18-year-old boy have the ability in Seville to paint things which are so sophisticated, that see so much, that have such a deep understanding of texture and surface and the quality of light?
The one thing about those paintings, the Velázquez paintings, that's so fascinating is that they give them a sense of temporality, a sense of time. I mean, we all know how long it takes to fry an egg. So when you're looking at that painting, you're occupying this very, immediate moment in time.
Yes.
And, you know what that moment is, how long it takes, the sound, the smell, everything that's involved in that.
Because this is what I've been thinking, because some say that food cannot be art because it doesn't have a lasting value. Yeah. And it's that moment of time, those smells, that heat, exactly, that is thanks to which the eggs are frying, and that moment it finishes at some point, and it's not art anymore. But Velázquez has frozen it in time. That has captured that in time, and that is very fascinating. And why do you think he decided to portray food? That 17, 18-year-old boy.
Just to jump, back to the picture of the water cellar, because the sophistication of what they were doing in the water cellar, it's almost like a whole demonstration of what he can do. He can paint clay. We see that from some of the other paintings. He can paint cloth and clothes. He can paint the copper pan. He can paint the garlic and the red onion specifically because he's looking. But in the water cellar, he also paints the glass, the stalked glass, like Ibn Furness invented. But inside the glass is a fig. And one of the things that Charlotte was experimenting with a lot was putting things into water to change their flavor. So from obviously lemon, but also orange peel, and putting orange peel into coffee, and playing with the point where flavors do slightly unexpected things.
Would you like another recipe?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Would you like an electuary of sour cherries for sick people who have lost their desire to eat?
I'd love to. I love cherries.
Take as many sour cherries as you wish and put them in a saucepan upon the fire and cast them in water by themselves and let them cook in that water until they turn very tender and appear white. And then throw out that water of theirs in which they have cooked. And then take a sieve of very thin horsehair in which you can strain them and rub them so much with your hands that everything passes through. Then for each pound of these cherries prepared like this, take half a pound of sugar and mix it in your saucepan on a gentle fire, constantly stirring with a cane until they are cooked. And then put it aside and put this electuary in a vessel of glazed earthenware, well stoppered if you wish. You can put in some cloves and a little cinnamon. Don't you love it? But I love the way you sort of get the sense of the hands and the horsehair and the earthenware and all these stages of painting. It's like listening to a Velázquez painting,
Charlotte, looking at the horsehair fabric that you've got on some of your chairs, and just thinking of someone making an open weave horsehair. Helena Lohrmans, and she's based in Portugal, and she's been looking at X-rays of old paintings, particularly paintings by the young Velázquez, because he appears to be working on linen tablecloths, because again, the weavers, probably Velázquez family made velvet. I think they made pantaloons for the New World, but they were there in Seville making velvet. And I love the idea of one of the Spanish conquistadors turning up with his roll of velvet and showing it to the 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 indigenous communities in South America, and I mean, I would just be completely sold the minute you touched velvet. But looking at Elena's weaving of different textiles, so she's doing hand weaving to recreate the canvases that Velázquez, but also El Greco and Caravaggio were painting on, so all around the same time. And the patterning is beautiful, and the way they're made. So all the way through, and you know, I love the idea of someone actually weaving horsehair, not to be tight, but to be loose, to make a sieve.
Yeah, yeah. I was just thinking to go back, temporality of cooking and eat, you know, how time becomes such a big part of it. I mean, if you think of other paintings of that period, still lives with fruit or flowers in them was such an important subject, because it was a sort of memento mori. It was about time passing and, you know, our lives passing, and these things that could only last for a short period of time, and that's so fundamental, you know, and it's such a, you know, I think it makes cooking and eating one of the greatest of arts, you know, one of the most fundamental of
the still life. In a way, the Romans probably had independent still life, but as a subject matter, as Charlotte said, this vanitas, this decay happening before your eyes of oysters, of lemons, of flowers laid out, often mixed with ceramic and beautiful and metal and beautiful objects. So it's very much about transformation, which is really what cooking is all about. So it's the transformation of oil paint into other materials, just like cooking takes and transforms the raw ingredients into extraordinary composite mixes of subtle flavors. I mean, it's probably worth thinking here that it wasn't just one-way traffic from the New World, it was two-way. So we sent them things as well. Probably not all desirable. Sugar. I'm sure lots of people in the Caribbean would have much rather sugarcane had not been introduced into the New World. But we took them, what else did we take them? Wheat, sugarcane, vines, not wine initially, because it took time to make wine in the New World, but they were for grapes, coffee, citric fruits, olives. So in the New World, olives were one of the greatest luxuries, but obviously later olive oil, melons, mangoes. I mean, mangoes going from the east to the west.
I suppose, India. I'm just thinking, I've got another recipe here. I mean, a lot of the ones that I've read or referred to show how close we are to people in the 1520s in terms of what we eat and how we think about food and what impact food might have on us as human beings. This is one that maybe sets us apart from that period. And this is roast cat as you wish to eat it. And it says, it says, you will take a cat that is fat and decapitate it. And after it is dead, cut off the head and throw it away, because it's not for eating. For they say that eating the brains will cause him who eats them to lose his senses and judgment. Then flay it very cleanly, open it and clean it well, then wrap it in a cloth of clean linen, and bury it beneath the ground where it must be for a day and a night, and then take it out of there and set it to roast on a spit. And roast it over the fire, and when beginning to roast it, grease it with good garlic and oil. And when you finish greasing it, whip it well with a green twig, and this must be done before it is well roasted, greasing and whipping it. And when it is roasted, cut it as if it were rabbit or a kid, and put it on a big plate, and take garlic and oil blended with a good broth in such a manner that it is well thinned, and cast it over the cat, and you may eat of it, because it is very good food. So this is a slightly weird one, you know, that
Yes.
where eating the brains might affect your judgment and burying it and, you know, all these strange ceremonies that surround food.
Yeah,
So I'm not
somehow
recommending you try this at home.
no. Times did change.
I know. Exactly.
And what is interesting that Velázquez was born when you mentioned when it was the plague, and
Exactly.
we are living also something similar at the moment, and we always come back to the subject of food somehow.
Exactly. Exactly. And food is medicine, you know, this is a
Mm.
huge subject in itself, you know, how what you eat is going to affect how you feel and function and survive. Mm,
Do you think a perfect dish can bring the same emotion as a masterpiece, a painting, or?
I think so.
Eating a perfect dish with the right conversation, I think, can really focus things in amazing ways. So there obviously you engage with things in different ways. So
Yeah.
eating and talking and sharing food. And I suppose in a way, for me, paintings are something that also need to be shared. You need to discuss them, look at them, uh, somehow engage with them in company. So I think in that sense, they're very similar. I mean, going back to the idea of polymaths, I love the
Mm.
idea that Velázquez was surrounded by what we could loosely call the Pacheco Academy. So Velázquez became apprenticed to Pacheco, who's an interesting but not a great artist in his own right. But he was someone who really, really understood the transformation of materials and really surrounded himself with extraordinary people. So, as Charlotte was saying, I think botany, the arrival of new plants, new thoughts about medicine and surgeons. So in the Pacheco Academy, there weren't only playwrights and poets, there were also surgeons and Benito Daza, who was an optician, so making of lenses, which again was terribly important at that time, because imagine not being able to have glasses. Your world suddenly starts to move out of focus. I mean, the subject of focus is absolutely fascinating, because I think Velázquez is one of those painters, and Valdés Leal and a lot of the others painting in Seville at this time, who, picking up on Charlotte's point about the passing of time, use focus, and not just scale, but actually things not being sharp when you're painting them, as a metaphor about the difference, if you like, between human vision, which is also perspective, divine light, divine vision.
One of the most powerful things about a great work of art is how you enter into the thinking or the conception or the mind of the person who's created it. You know, whether it's a great painting or a great book or a great piece of music, you've been transported and you've been given this ability to see through someone else's eyes. And I think that does happen with food. I think that when you are really eating something that's been conceived of, you know, with that same artistry and vision, you know, you really do experience that sense of being transported,
Yeah.
that sense of being able to perceive something as it was conceived by someone else, you know, and I think that's great art, you know.
And I think it's also important around Velázquez and Pacheco were all these antiquarians and the new growth of archaeologists. So Seville is one of the Roman capitals. I mean, there are amazing ruins and remains that got recycled, so they appear in Islamic buildings. They were lying around in Seville at this time. And the Duke of Alcalá who was building Casa Pilatos, where Velázquez would have gone to watch Pacheco painting the ceiling and would have copied the great Roman, the classical sculptures that Alcalá was bringing. I think, this is exactly what Charlotte's talking about somehow having empathy. And I think food is a great source of empathy. You're sharing it together and you understand it. I mean, to see the world through other people's eyes seems to be the greatest challenge now, that increasingly it's about controlling what you see.
Yeah.
And, I'm not romantic. I think part of what we're trying to say and look at in the time of Velázquez is exactly this sort of fundamentalist control of what you were allowed to think, coming through the church and the Inquisition as the church got stronger and stronger. But really we want this to be that moment you go into this space and you have the time to reflect and hopefully to eat, because I think cooking is going to be an important part.
What we're trying to do, Asti, we're trying to make a kitchen there as, it would have been in the 16th century, and which is, which couldn't still function as a kitchen. And people, I think that would connect you to that period more instantly and directly than anything else.
Absolutely.
You eat as they ate, you're instantly in this mindset, you're instantly transported,
To have the ingredients explained, I think, just to be there and to suddenly think about where did a chili pepper hadn't been there before. Suddenly there are these new flavors that transform how you experience the world,
through eating.
Exactly.
Do you have
ate instead of fought each other? They were just big feasts instead of.
Well, yes, this is the thing. When you look at history, it's written by the ruling class, and we would imagine, that they were feasts and all this extravaganza. And in fact, we don't know much what simple people were doing.
Exactly.
And that's what really fascinates me, actually, what simple people were cooking, eating. And
Well, I think in this case, in the beginning of the 17th century, it was amazingly complex. So I think the flavors were this extraordinary mix of the old world and the new world, and all the Abrahamic religion thrown into the same cooking pot. And it produced an extraordinary culinary moment in time. And the paintings of Velázquez somehow capture this, that the act of cooking, the act of cleaning, the act of the utensils you're using, and the tools that go with the cooking.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I think we can get some of this into the Casa Natal de Velázquez, which hopefully will be opening later next year, depending on how much the current plague slows us down.
Well, speaking of war, there's a recipe here for an armored capon. The little birds. Take a capon and roast it, and when it's half roasted, remove the barding fat, and take egg yolks beaten with parsley and sugar, and let them be very well beaten, and put these eggs all over the capon, and take pine nuts and peeled almonds. And while you put on the yolks, put on the pine nuts and almonds bit by bit in such a way that they will adhere to the sauce. Then put the barding fat back on over the eggs and the capon. And it should be upon the fire until it's completely roasted. Tastes rather delicious, don't you think?
Yeah.
It sounds rather great.
It does.
Almonds and pine nuts.
How much of these recipes do you think they are still being cooked in Spain?
I think a lot of the ingredients and using almonds, for instance, almonds run through everything. Almond cakes, almond tarts, which are delicious, using almond flour, as a basis for a lot of things. Figs are used a lot. Some of these, I'm not familiar with that kind of approach to cooking, but that seems more Moroccan to me. You still find these sort of combinations
And the tuna empanada, the kind of food that's a staple food in Spain now, was really the sort of thing that Velázquez would have eaten, certainly as his grandparents would as a Jewish food. It's absolutely part of their culinary tradition. And that still is eaten every day today.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the Madame de Pompadour painting in Waddesdon.
Yeah.
I was wondering, do you think can a perfect copy hanging on your wall, economic reasons apart, bring the same pleasure as the original painting?
I mean, I think so much of what you see is a projection. So I think in the case of what Charlotte and I did at Waddesdon, the Madame de Pompadour in the frame was about revealing this. So the design of the exhibition is a very careful and clever unpacking of the narratives and the luxury and the excess of Madame de Pompadour's time. It has to be one of the most excessive of all times. So this is just before the French Revolution, and where the division between the rich and the poor was probably about as extreme as it is today. And then it only levels. But what we really wanted to do was to ask that very question. So I think normally what you see is your prejudice. And when you look at something, if you know it's the Mona Lisa, but then if suddenly someone said, this is not the Mona Lisa, this was painted in Leonardo's studio, would it change that painting? Well, I'm not suggesting that will happen with the Mona Lisa, but there are many paintings that people for years praised as being one thing, and then are seen as being another. And I think if you suddenly find something's a fake, then you feel you've been deceived. So but actually, if you're told this is a copy of that and side by side they're identical, then I think that's a different experience, because you're being asked to look, you're being asked to understand. So I would definitely say a very, very good copy, which has the qualities of the original, can certainly give the same pleasure to the vast majority of people looking at it. It may not always be able to give the same forensic information to a scientist wishing to study it, but if it's about pleasure, it's definitely something that I think now we can do it. So as we did in Waddesdon, side by side, you can't see the difference from one thing or another.
No, you can't. No.
So, I don't think a copy has a function, and it always has. So throughout the whole of history, the great canon of works that we value are the most copied works. And they're the things that are most studied, that people pour most time into. So a forensically accurate copy, which is not, so like the ones we're making of Velázquez, where we're not doing subjective interpretation, we're objectively recording the surface, the color, sometimes under the surface, and putting this back. I believe in the Casa Natal de Velázquez, everyone will be told these are not the original paintings. But I hope they'll realize that through this level of sophisticated copying, we can reveal many things about the Velázquez paintings. So perhaps you can see even more, because rather than being presented the painting in a glass. So one of the things we're working on at the moment is the Raphael cartoons in London, in the Victoria Museum, which are so fragile. They're shown high up on the wall, behind thick glass. And there, I would argue, you can definitely see those paintings better as copies than you can as originals, within the conditions that you have to see them. So I hope the way we copy will actually become part of a way of revealing why art is so intrinsically important and why it's so different from leisure. I mean, leisure and art often overlap, because they're often about pleasure. So
Yeah.
it's the dropping the P. So they're about enjoyment and sharing. And to me, that's the role and function of art. And as Charlotte said earlier, it's about seeing the world through other people's eyes, and it's about empathy.
Yeah, absolutely. And understanding food, for example, is also what was eaten at those times, is understanding better.
It's like sort of being able to speak another language.
Yes.
You enter into the mindset of people through what they eat or what they say or how they think. You know, it's a wonderful thing to connect people. We should all be eating together in this terrible world.
I know. Yeah, and somehow food has connected us all.
And it tells you everything that Donald Trump eats McDonald's.
Exactly.
That's where everything went wrong. The food
you are what you eat.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for listening. Have a nice day.